All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight to the Rochester Hills Museum. We're doing a program tonight on a topic that about fire protection in our community that we have not ever done in our community. And as we've looked over the last few years, we realized that even in our archival collections here at the museum, we just didn't have complete information. And so several years ago, Station 2 and Nancy Buddy and some of the Brooklyn firefighters started donating some archival material to the museum. And that really sparked our interest in what was going on actually going back to the 1890s when the Rochester Fire Department was established. And then to watch as our town was growing up with population, and we'll show that a little bit with this PowerPoint presentation. We had a chance to start seeing how this town was evolving and how the needs for fire protection were changing. And the politics that go along with that sometimes, and also just the need to be able to cover everyone. So every community had protection. And so we saw the evolution of the Brooklyn's Fire Department in the southeast corner of our city, and then the Avondale Fire Department was formed, and then how they formed to become the Avon Township Fire Department. And it was just kind of a fascinating change of events, but we also realized that we didn't have all the archival material. One of the points of this presentation tonight was to say that we're still looking, and as a local history museum, our job is to collect that information. Samantha Lawrence is in the back of the room today, and she's the archivist for the museum. So we have pulled out the archival material we have for both Brooklyn's and Avondale Fire Departments. So for those who have been here for many years, you're welcome to, the goal tonight is that I want you to see that stuff. It's great things. And also it's a chance for us to quietly suggest that at some point, if those artifacts that you have, if you're looking for a home for those, after you've admired it on your living room walls for years and years and the display cases in your house, to know that we're a repository. And our goal is to have these artifacts so 50 years and 100 years from now, people can still enjoy and understand the evolution of the fire department. What really motivated this whole presentation today was when a previous firefighter, Pete Zill, who's going to be speaking next, approached us. Pete is a former paid-on-call firefighter in Avon Township / Rochester Hills, and so was here for a number of years, and then did a career in Florida for 26 years as a firefighter paramedic, and has some great stories about surviving hurricanes in Florida. And in retirement now, he has found himself right back to where he started here in the Rochester Hills area, and was very interested and intrigued, and started contacting us. I mean, enough so that he's got his name on the entrance slide. So, and I know that for some of the chiefs here, I know that I think people are closing the door and lowering the shades when Pete comes, because we've been trying very hard to gather the information. And jokingly, I was telling Chief Strelchak that when we had to look up some records from 1879, we had no problem. Our archives are scanned, they're online, we've digitized everything. But if you asked me for 1979, I'd have a much harder time. We don't have some of the stuff that's even more recent, but Pete was the one that started stitching this all together. So as part of this presentation tonight, we want you to feel comfortable to stop us at any point. If you see something on a slide, to help us understand even some of the archival pictures that we've put in here and that Pete has really pulled together here. If you were on one of the fires that you see pictures of, by all means, stop us so we can hear the story too. This is a great opportunity. We are filming this presentation through the Rochester Hills video crew here, and at some point it'll be available on our city's YouTube channel. So it becomes very important for us to hear what you have to say, and we'd love to hear it. When Pete is done with his presentation, we're going to ask some of the current chiefs and previous chiefs to kind of come forward, and we have some questions we're going to throw out at them, questions that Pete and I have come up with, but actually ask the audience too to ask questions so we can all have a little bit more of an appreciation, I guess, for all of our firefighters. With this, I'd like to turn it over to Pete Zill, and we'll move forward with our presentation. Pete, here you go. Do you want me to take that one? I'll take this old mic.
Well, thank you, Pat, and thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight for this. Hopefully it's going to be an interesting and educational experience for you. A little bit about myself, just to add on, I am retired. I did 33 years in the fire service, and recently I joined up with the city of Rochester, so I am a paid-on-call member with them. So tonight we're going to give you a snapshot of the history, and hopefully it'll give you a fair representation of what has changed and what has not changed over the years. Pat?
Yeah, you know what, and I'll mention, these are the things that the Rochester Hills Museum does in our archival. These are the materials that we have. The good news is that nearly the things that you see on the screen with the maps, the diaries, the business records, and the newspapers, we have scanned those. Those are all digitized records. And if you go through our our website, you can download and see anything in our archives, as well as our newspapers are digitized and they're searchable PDF documents. So our goal always is to make this as available to the public as possible. Not everything, though, is digitized. Some of the Brooklyn's Fire Department records you'll see in the back have not been done yet, so we're still working on that. But our goal, you can start seeing the kinds of things that we're trying to collect. And you know, our focus is not on fire departments far and wide. It's on local. You know, we cover the Rochester Hills, Oakland Township communities. That's really what our focus is, and that's where we stay focused. So if there's something you feel like you could contribute to our archives, we'd love to talk to you further.
If you have any questions, or if you need any explanations, or if I'm going too fast, just raise your hand and we'll address that. So we're going to step back in time. We're going to show you some maps. This is what the Rochester Fire Department provided protection for back in the 1930s. This is all 36 square miles of Avon Township, to include the 1 square mile of the village of Rochester. Thank you, Chief. Back in 1947, the Brooklyn's Fire Department was developed. 1954, the Avondale Fire Department started. 1977, Avon Township put a third station up in the northeast, or the northwest part of the township. 1981, the township built Station 5. And today, present day, that is what the fire districts look like. So we're going to step back in time 100 years. This is what Avon Township looked like 100 years ago. These were some of the challenges. There really was no fire protection. There was no municipal water source outside the village of Rochester. If you were lucky to get a fire brigade going, maybe you could save a home or a barn. But pretty much this is what you see, what you saw back then 100 years ago. This picture right here is the northeast corner of Sheldon and Tinkin. So the firefighters from Rochester Hills, what's at their present location? Sheldon and Tinkin. This is the northeast corner. Isn't that the high school now? Okay.
That's the Sheldon Road farmhouse.
Yes. So what you see here is this is Tinkin. Sheldon's up here, and if you notice, you have the railroad tracks. The Detroit Urban Railroad also ran through there. That track went up to Romeo. This picture back here, is when John R. Road was one lane. So, and this picture was taken, it's looking north. That's between Hamlin and Avon roads. So, as you see, these are some of the challenges from a fire suppression or firefighting standpoint. In 1910, the Rochester Fire Department was available. The department was established in 1985. Back in those days, they had 2 hose carts and a ladder truck, but all that apparatus was hand pulled. So if you had a fire a mile or 2 away, chances are this equipment would not have showed up. There is nothing in the documents of the history that shows animals were ever used, such as horses, to pull these pieces of apparatus. Here's a picture of a hand cart. That's exactly the style that the village of Rochester had. It had 400 feet of cotton hose on it. And these hand carts were designed to hook up to a fire hydrant. It'd be pulled to the fire scene, and then there's some nozzles. These nozzles would be attached to the hose, and firefighting efforts could start. This here is downtown Rochester. This is the James, Hotel James, St. James, thank you. And this is what this cart system was designed for. It wasn't designed for an area such as Avon Township that was so rural. Well, in the mid-1926-27, after a couple disastrous fires in Avon Township, the community got together and they decided that they needed to buy a fire truck. The village of Rochester had already purchased a fire truck, and apparently there wasn't enough money in the coffers for Avon Township to do so. So this truck right here was purchased by subscribers, folks that lived within a 7-mile radius of town. And on today's dollars, they paid about $850 per family. And as you see, 83 subscribers joined in on that. This truck was designed exclusively for a rural community. It was a chemical truck. And what that meant was there was 4 water tanks in the back, and they would add wafers of sodium bicarbonate. And then when they wanted the water pressurized in the tank, they would add muriatic acid, and those 2 chemicals together created carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide forced the water out of the tanks into these hoses right here. This truck right here was able to provide a stream of water 70 feet long for almost a half hour with those 4 tanks.
Just that, if you go back one slide, the station that you see right there.
So here are the 30s. Some developments happened. As you see, like the Chief Cieslik mentioned, it moved to the street, well, back then it was 5th Street, also known as University Drive. That station has since been moved to off of 2nd Street now. Fire protection really started to change because that original chemical truck was running so many calls that they realized that the village of Rochester could not sustain it by itself. So they started charging for service. In 1936, it was $35 an hour. In 1937, $50, and in 1938, it was come up to $75 an hour. So we can see that some of the changes that had occurred. Some of the fires in the 30s. The Dodge Estate barn fire. Some of the folks from Avon Township remember 1983. Well, that barn actually burned twice. So in 1935 and in 1983, those barns burned. About this time, the village of Rochester was running more calls in Avon Township than in the village. This home right here, it still stands. This was known as the Avon Hills River View Rest Home. That home burned. The city of Pontiac responded, along with the village of Rochester. 9 residents were rescued. And as you see, there's some more development. The community really started to grow after the First World War, and it even started to grow more after the Second World War. 1940s. The truck out here, Chief Cieslik, 1940, Mac, 41? 42, okay. 1942, thank you. Right here, what happened during the war years was most of the communities were unable to receive apparatus because the war effort was needed. But if you had a type of an industry such as National Trust Drill that produced a lot of war material, that industry could obtain a fire truck, which is what happened. Howard McGregor bought that fire truck for his business. He graciously allowed the community, both Rochester Village and Avon Township, to use that piece of apparatus. And we're fortunate to still have it around today. And also in the 40s, the township and the village realized that they needed to equally divide the costs. As more calls were happening in Avon Township, so just to have the fairness. In 1943, Rochester Fire Department responded to 58 calls. Typically, they had a 4-day course at the Ann Arbor Fire College. So, Chief, today, for 2017, Chief Cieslik, how many calls do you think the City of Rochester is going to run?
Well, we're currently at 1,492 calls, and we'll top out someplace around 1,940 for this year.
Okay, so close to 1940 in 2017 versus 58 calls in 1953. What happened after they purchased that Mack fire truck? Well, Howard McGregor purchased a Mack fire truck. Avon Township realized they needed their own fire truck. So they went ahead and they purchased this apparatus here. It was very revolutionary and new, where it had a high-pressure pump, and that was basically came out of the Navy after World War II. And both communities agreed to pay for half the cost of the truck, and then half the maintenance and half of the manning for the vehicle. This apparatus served the community for many years, and it was retired in 1982 from the Rochester Fire Department. Thank you, Chief. You might question where the building is in the background. This picture was taken when it was leaving the factory from Long Island, New York. Also in the 1940s, a new player came to the game, the Brooklyns. The Brooklyns started their own fire department. It was actually a private fire department, and it was paid by subscription. It was $10 to sign up, and then the $2 upkeep charge. And by 1949, the Brooklyns Fire Department Incorporated had 300 subscribers. And they also provided service that went into Shelby Township and some parts of northern Utica. Then in the mid-50s, the Avondale Fire Department started. A group of volunteers, group of men from the community approached Avon Township. They said, we need a fire station. Avon Township provided all the supplies. And on the weekends and during the evenings, the volunteers actually built this station right here. And Butch Sheldon, Butch over there, Butch's father is one of the original founding members of the Avondale Fire Department. 1950s, we start seeing some change. Rochester Fire Department hired their first full-time fire chief, George Ross. 600 lots were developed in the west side of Avon Township. And at this time in 1956, Avon Township assumed control of both the fire districts. So they bought Avondale Fire Department and Brooklyns Fire Department for $1. At that time, both those departments were receiving tax-funded dollars. Here's the Brooklyns Fire Department having a resuscitator drill. And this picture right here, even in the 50s, this is Tinkin Road. This is Tinkin Road in between, now it's looking west, that's between Livernois and Brewster. And Brewster's probably kind of up on the hill right here. The 60s, more change. As you see here, the township realized they needed to have some burning ordinances. In the 60s, they had a lot of train fires. The train north of town that would go to Orion, a lot of those trains caused sparks. And they talk about a fire that was over 400 acres, and it took 150 firefighters over 4 hours to control. So there was also some changes with the millage. Brooklyns and Avondale Fire Department budgets increased over 110%. The community realized that they needed to upgrade, so they all came together and they voted for that. There was even a talk of a third fire station in '67 in the northwest part of the township. Also in 1967, Crittenden Hospital opened. You talk about EMS and ambulance service. Well, back then the funeral homes were used. And both Pixley's and Potier told the community they would no longer provide ambulance service. And that's when a company by the name of Fleet Ambulance took over. And that changed to St. Ange and gradually into General Ambulance. And then community came into the scene later on. Here's a picture of the Brooklyns' first engine, or that's actually their Ford, the 1957, right, Steve Swan? Okay. And here is engine 601 from Rochester. Is Bob Tyrell, Chief Tyrell in the audience? No?
Bob's not here, but that's based off of a GMC chassis.
Okay, thank you. Here's some changes, or some continued growth in the 60s. The city of Rochester needed a grass truck, so both communities came together and purchased it, half and half, $2,000 apiece. Also with those tax dollars, Brooklyns was able to buy a ladder truck. So there they are training at one of the old Ferry Seed Farm barns. In this picture here at the city of Rochester, that's Chief Ross, and this is Lyle Buchanan. Well, here's what happened to this farm in 1968. Just to the north of here, and you'll see the slab when you go out there this evening, that was a 3-story barn. And that burned. 12 cows were killed. This picture right here is the same Mack that's in the parking lot. That Mack was backed down into Stony Creek out back here, and it drafted, and it provided water for firefighting efforts. This has since been closed. This is Romeo Road, but look at all the spectators there. Here is a couple more pictures of that. Just to your left here, if you go out that way tonight, there's the two silos. And from what Pat has mentioned, that fire was caused by children playing with matches. Is that right? Okay. And Bob Tyrell was there. Bob was with the city of Rochester. Bob was with around 52 years. Okay. 1970s, you start seeing some change here. What happened was, well, first thing is the fire trucks in Avon Township started changing color. That was the first yellow fire truck that was purchased, and that was actually given to the Avondale Fire Department. The Haven Fire. The Haven Fire had 30 rooms. It was a mansion built back in the 20s, turned into a psychiatric hospital in the 30s because of the Depression. And that burned in 73 for several hours. My understanding is the roof had slate, so therefore it kept a lot of the heat and the fire in. 1975 was a big change in the community. The township citizens voted to merge both fire departments and create Avon Township. So that was the beginning of the Avon Township Fire Department. Mark Belkoff, now deceased, was appointed the first fire chief. In 1976, Avon Township ran 326 calls. 1970s, look at the population, 24,500. 1977, Station 4 was built. It's up on Walton. It's being refurbed currently. Is that Chief Canto correct? Okay. That station originally cost $225,000. 1978, Avon Township assumed duties for dispatching from the city of Rochester. Rochester Police Department up until that time provided all dispatch service. They hired 3 full-time dispatchers, and Chief Walterhouse was one of those first ones. Is that right, Chief?
I think he's in that picture on the upper right. Greg, is that you in the upper right corner, holding the ribbon?
So yes, but back then it was probably inspector or dispatcher Walterhouse. Is that probably correct? So here's Chief Belkoff. To the back, showing his back, is Earl Borden, since passed. He was a supervisor for Avon Township. Some changes here. In 1978, a fire pact was signed between the village, from the Avon Township and the Rochester City. What happened was they decided that the city of Rochester could better serve the immediate area surrounding their city versus having Avon Township respond. And in 1979, an oddity, Station 5 opened. It was actually in a total gas station. That gas station no longer provided mechanical services, breakdown services, so Avon Township leased it, and they put 2 fire trucks in there. And Chief Crowell was one of the first members of that department, that station there, and you were a cashier at that gas station, is that correct? Okay. Now, if there was a fire call, were you allowed to leave your post? You were? 1980s, population 40,000, really starting to grow here. 1980 also, what happened was Avon Township assumed all fire protection for the entire township. Up until then, Rochester had been involved with a good portion of the area. Look at the alarm load. 1980, 978. The other picture said 326. So we've tripled our alarm load in 4 years. The alarm load for Avon Township tripled. The budget was $760,000. And at that time in 1982, Avon Township took over the fire protection contract for Oakland Township. That was at $21,000 from the, up until then, the city of Rochester provided protection. This picture here of Engine 31, Bud Landry's since passed away. They're working a fire there. That was assigned to the Station 3. The story behind this truck is 2 of them were purchased for the city of Troy. They came with the wrong color. This is lime green. The city of Troy uses school bus yellow. So the city of Troy said, we're not going to accept those fire trucks. So Avon Township purchased this one and Pontiac Township, which is now Auburn Hills, purchased the other one. They got these fire trucks for about 25% off the original cost. The picture here is a tanker fire. It was mutual aid. That was in the area of I-75 and M59. Gary Nix was involved in that. Is that right, Gary? You drove around to all the fire stations and gathered foam. And these three firefighters here were part of Station 3, formerly Avondale Fire Department. The 1980s, 10-year plan. This is actually the end of the 10-year plan. Earl Borden, the supervisor for Avon Township, went to the fire chief, Mark Belkoff, and said, in 10 years, these are the goals that I want you to complete. And at the end of that 10th year, the number one goal was to have a fire station open in the middle of the city. And that's exactly what happened. But before that, in 1983, the 5-alarm Meadowbrook barn fires. We talked about that, and back in 1938, the barns also burned. Well, they burned twice. And there is one of the pictures there. Chief Walterhouse, you were on that scene, weren't you? Yes. Okay. Would you say that was a rather hot fire? Okay, it sure looks like it. Oh, yep, exactly. Jim Donnelly was also there. Was anyone else there? Chief Sheslick was there? Okay, great. Butch was there, Ron was there, and Gary was there. Thank you. Right here, is that the young Steve Swan in this picture? So there's the old crew from Station 2. And in the 80s, in 1984, the citizens of Avon Township voted to incorporate. So Avon Township became Rochester Hills. Pretty much the only thing that changed for the fire department was just the names. But in 1987, the first full-time firefighters were hired, and they hired 4, and they added 4 from the dispatch center. So there's a total of 8 firefighters that were hired. And they worked 4 10-hour days. Are any of those firefighters here tonight? Chief Quain, exactly, okay. So we're just going to break up the historical, educational program and just look at some pictures. These are some of the pictures from throughout the years. There's a young Chief Walterhouse there. This is the picture of Station 5 when it was at the total gas station. This was the second fire station for Station 2. That was a Brooklyn station. That station was built in '69. And then this was the Avondale station, also Station 3. Chief Sheldon, you were the district chief down there at that time, weren't you? Okay. And here is Station 4 that's being currently renovated, and Station 5, which has been tore down and rebuilt. But this is a fair representation of Avon Township / Rochester Hills utilizing different types of fire apparatus. They utilize a mini pumper and a MIDI pumper, MIDI. And the concept was you would use the small truck for the small fire and the big truck for the big fire. And you also had a medium-sized truck that was usually a first out. So here's a fair representation. Here's the larger truck, then of course the smaller truck. The department bought 2 Macs. Rochester City bought 2 Macs back in the day. Avon Township and Rochester Hills also bought 2 Macs. The 90s, look at the alarm load. Almost 2,500. So what happened also in the 90s is there was an aggressive fleet replacement program. A lot of changes. The population is 62,000. Here you have, this is Chief Bill Thornton. Back then, that was probably firefighter Frank Geraci and also firefighter Art Raschke. Both Art and Frank have passed away. But you see some of the changes in this picture. A new ladder truck, a new command vehicle, new gear. So the department really started making some strides. 1990s, 1996, Bill Thornton was promoted to chief. And look at the alarms, almost 3,200, EMS, 2,000. And you start to see some changes in the volunteer numbers, the paid-on calls. In the 90s, the ranks dropped by almost 30%. Here's a fair representation of the apparatus back then. Chief Canto, this truck was recently refurbed and is back in service, is that correct? Okay. New player, Oakland Township, 1995. So I don't know a lot of the history of Oakland Township outside of what is on here. Would Chief Stralchek like to make any comments, or?
No. To start a fire department, and it was rather interesting building a fire department from the ground up. But there was a lot of people that helped us through the process, a lot of different communities, a lot of some of the firefighters that are here presently helped the department get to where it is today. So that was, it was quite a big step for us.
Thank you. So you see some of the history there. In 2002, Station 2 opened, and today Avon Township provides complete advanced life support with transport capabilities. In 2013, Paul Stralchek became Chief Stralchek. 2000s, population 68,000. Greg Walterhouse was promoted to chief. The dispatch center was civilianized. Up until then, there was firefighter dispatchers in the dispatch center. And also in 2001, the first 24-hour coverage started with 6 firefighters. Chief Crowell, Lieutenant McLeod. Paul, is that right? I mean Cliff? Yeah. Okay. And here they are. They had they delivered a baby. So congratulations to them.
There were, to the best of my recollection, 12 people in the bedroom.
12, okay. They were cheering you on.
Yeah, there were 4 firefighters, the dad, obviously mom, her sister with a video camera over my shoulder looking up. I looked at her and said, you might want to go to the side. Her 2 small boys standing by the door, 2 sheriff's deputies, and the 2 ambulance attendants from community EMS, all at the same time. It's a good thing it was a big guy.
Wow, okay. No pressure, right?
No, no pressure at all.
Well, looks like that baby is very healthy and doing well. 2000s, Chief Crowell was promoted. More full-time firefighters are added. 2008, Fire Chief, or Rochester Fire Department hired or promoted John Cieslik to Fire Chief. Here you see 3 of the originals. Jim Bradford, recently retired Lieutenant Inspector. There's a Battalion Chief, Tim Quain. And Mike Miklowski, who moved on to the DPW. What we have here are members throughout the years with Avon Township and Rochester Hills. Station 4 crew, this is another Station 4 crew. Out of this picture here, 5 of those members became chiefs, different ranks. So that just talks about the leadership and the quality of the people that were hired. Here, I believe that was a stair climb down at the Renson.
It was a stair climb at the Renson.
Okay, alrighty. Here you have the Bradford family. 2 sons and a father that all worked at Station 4. Bud Landry from Avondale has since passed away. Pete Willis, that was a district chief at Station 4. 2000s, getting closer to the current day. The city started non-emergency transfers. I understand that's since stopped. The dispatch center services were transferred to Oakland County Sheriff. Here's some of their a house fire they had, and here's some of the community involvement and the firefighter involvement to increase the services for the community. Look at the numbers from in this 10-year span from 2004 to 2014. The volunteer numbers decreased again by 25%. So we see a decline in the number of people that are willing to be paid on-call firefighters. In 2004, Sean Canto was hired as fire chief, and here's a couple of pictures. Here's a good representation of both the City of Rochester and the City of Rochester Hills working together, sharing resources and helping each other out. This is what you see today. Here are the facts and the figures of all three fire departments we've talked about this evening, the City of Rochester, Rochester Hills, and Oakland Township. And if you look at the City of Rochester, their call load from that 58 and 19, I believe it was 42, to the 326 and 1976 with the City of Rochester Hills. And of course, here's Paul Strauchek's department with their alarm load at 1,000 plus. You have any questions on this slide? No? Okay. Well, here are the patches over the years. You see the Brooklands and the Avondale became Avon, and that subsequently became Rochester Hills. The City of Rochester, and look at their service, 1895 till today. They've been around a long time. They have a long history of helping.
The City of Rochester is the longest organized fire department in Oakland Township, or Oakland County.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And here is the Township of Oakland. Here are some of the credits, references, and resources. I didn't do this all by myself. Pat didn't do this all by himself, and neither did Sam do it. We had a lot of help, and a lot of you are on here. And if you want to contribute and want to help us, we would like any input, any information, any artifacts that you have. But this is just a small list of the people that have helped us put together the history. It was a snapshot. There's a lot more to it. I thought at one time that I would have a hard time developing a 44-page PowerPoint, but it actually happened pretty easily. So here we are today. And if you don't have any questions, thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, I have a question for Chief Cieslak. In a lot of our oldest archival documents, the firefighters from Rochester had a camp called on Tommy's Lake. Yeah. So what's the story on that? Do you know?
As much as firefighters get together to fight fires, it was really kind of a family, not only a family of the firefighters, but also the family of the families, if that makes sense. And the Rochester Fire Department has an association, and the association took some of the money that it did either through fundraisers or their dues, and we still pay dues today as a firefighter, and they had a cabin up on Tommy's Lake. And at that time, they would go up there for fishing tournaments and fish fries, and you could go ahead and sign up and have the cabin on the weekend or sometime during the week. And like most men, our wives would tell us we don't clean up much after ourselves. And so eventually, in the early 70s, a decision was made not to maintain the cabin anymore, and it was sold.
Okay. It's currently, is it a YMCA camp or something? It's still
Yeah,
there.
I think
Tommy's Lake is in Lake Orion, right? Is that up in that area?
It's still, the original building, I think, eventually did burn down, but the property up there is part of that camp. That's correct.
All right. As we go,
I have a quick
ahead,
question
please.
for you guys. In Rochester, you still hear the noon whistle, right? Yeah. Why do we blow the whistle at noon? Not to tell you to go to lunch. Make sure this works. No, that's one of the reasons, but why? Does anybody know the history behind that? Well, the fire department in Rochester were originally called to fires by the whistles from the knitting mills. And so if there was a whistle, or the whistle, the fire department would come. When some of the mills eventually went away, they went to the whistle. So when the whistle was pushed by the police department, and there were 4 game well systems in the city of Rochester, and you'll see some of the parts of the old game well system back here on the table. Well, after a house caught on fire on Walnut Street around 1919, the police department dispatcher went ahead and activated the siren, but it didn't work. And so finally the fire department, or the firefighters, saw the smoke and everything coming. And you might, any ideas of why the whistle didn't work? Birds. Birds had built a nest in the whistle. Because we hadn't had a fire for a month or two, the birds built a nest in the fire siren. And so what was decided to do is that they would blow the whistle every day so that birds wouldn't be in there. And so they chose the time at 12 o'clock noon so that, instead of being random, firefighters wouldn't know. So after 1919, you hoped like heck that you didn't have a fire at 12 o'clock. Because if they blew the whistle at 12 o'clock, people would think it was lunchtime and not a fire.
Yeah, how does the ticker tape work in the back?
Well, there were game well boxes, and what you do, there were 4 of them. There was one up by where the Dairy Queen is now. There was one on University. There was one at the 4th Street and Main, and there was one next to South Street Bridge. And what you would do is you would pull a lever, and if you think about it, it was similar to like a teletype, and it would transmit a signal. And in the box back there, Pete, did you bring the box with the coded wheels? No, I didn't. Okay, well, each one of the alarms had a coded wheel in it, so it would tap out a code. It might tap out 3, a 2, and a 4, which meant that the fire was up on someplace around the Dairy Queen, up at that area. And from that point in time, then the firefighters were told where the fire was at. So that was down at the fire station. So when they heard the whistle, they went down there and then they would read the tape. There's the tape printer and some of the old tape with it still, and that's how the firefighters were originally summoned.
Great, thanks. I think anytime you talk to a firefighter, the question you always should ask them is, what was the biggest fire you were ever at? So Dave Mallman, do you have one? One story you can tell us, one fire that stands out? I'm handing you the microphone, so you're on.
I would say Dermavogue downtown probably is one of the bigger ones. Dermavogue in 2006 would be
Yeah.
Dermavogue.
They almost lost Mr. B's and Greens on both sides,
Yeah,
so.
that's probably one of the bigger ones would have been that.
All right, pass the mic down. One fire, feel free, start taking the mic if there's one fire that stands out in the Rochester area.
I mean, the oddest one would have been down my street. I came home from work on Stonehenge and I heard like a boom. I thought maybe somebody was having trouble barbecuing, and I went to the end of the driveway and I could just see things, smoke and things drifting down. So there's nothing like getting on the scene of a fire within 20 seconds and having to wait for trucks to show up and everybody wondering, what are you going to do? So
And there were no hydrants on Stonehenge, as
there's
I
no
remember, so
hydrants.
everything.
You're exactly. A lot of the neighbors, that's when they realized that we had no hydrants at that time.
All right. Pass it right back. Sean, do you have one that?
Not that comes to mind.
John, any funny stories that you want to? There's some stories that 50 years have to go by before we can really tell because the chief is still here, so we can't. Go ahead.
Okay, we had a church fire on Auburn Road, middle of the winter, cold. We were up on the roof. I went up on the roof with Dwayne Upton. I told him, watch out for that hole, and he fell through. And I hollered down to a couple guys to go in and get him, and he come running out. So he didn't get hurt, but it was very memorable. We went back to the station. We couldn't even hardly get out of our coats because they were frozen. You had to take something to knock on the coats to get them freed up.
Here earlier, you were talking about when Oakland Township was organizing, you just decided to do it. Chief Gary, is there anything, a moment in time?
My dad got me started on it. He was the district chief. He was actually on Rochester City Fire Department in the early 70s. So as a kid, I was always hanging out at the fire station, would ride with him to different fires and things like that. And then he got me involved in it.
So were you a cadet? Did they have a cadet program back then?
Yeah, I got in
So
as
high
an
school?
explorer, yeah. Yeah, I was still I was 15, so.
So you became a
started that.
firefighter at 18, is that?
Yes.
That was 10 years ago or
Right
15
on my
years ago?
18th birthday, yeah, about 10 years ago.
All right.
Yeah, I hit his truck once, but that didn't count.
So pass it right in front of you. Chief, you were talking about, you joined one day when you heard Oakland Township was starting a fire department, but you almost became a Troy firefighter. Tell that story.
Back about 10 years before I started in Oakland Township, I tried to get on Troy, and I went to one of the stations and talked with somebody there, and they told me they weren't hiring any more volunteers, they were full. So I stopped, and I didn't look anymore until I came out to Oakland Township. And then that's when Bill Benoit got a hold of me, and I decided to join then. So,
And you worked your way up.
been working my way up.
So what's the future of the firefighting business? You know, as we look 10 years from now, from a technology standpoint, do you guys have any feeling I got the chiefs all sitting right here, 3 communities here. So what do you see? What's the next thing that's going to happen? What's the big innovation? We've got thermal imaging cameras. We've got great technology. We got a truck out there, Chief Canto, 1.2 million is our largest tower ladder truck out there. So what's the future?
So I think you just have to take a look at the trucks that are out there. If you take a look at the 1942 Mack out there and the size of it, and you'd say, well, how did you ever use that? And we'd say, well, that's back when firefighters were firefighters. Now if you ask the fire department, we're now pretty much an all discipline, right? You take a look at the beautiful tower ladder truck out at Station 4 and the things that truck now has to do. You take a look at even the new engine that Rochester has out there, and you take a look at the equipment. Back in the day, you used to have a ladder company, you'd have a rescue company, you'd have a squad, you'd have engine companies. Well, nowadays, all of those things are fitting onto the same truck. And also the type of missions that the fire departments change too. We used to respond to fires, now it's extrications, technical rescue, trench rescue, building collapse, and all of the requirements that now come with it. And so with that, the trucks continue to get bigger and bigger, and when you start taking a look at technology, the one thing that's never changed is you put the wet stuff on the red stuff, right, and the fire goes out, hopefully. But you also take a look at the size of the pumps. You know, the truck out there back in 1942 has a 750 gallon per minute pump on it. Chief, what do you have on Tower Ladder 4? 2,000 gallons per minute. And you say, well, why? Well, it's because of a lot of things has to do with the size of the structures, right? The city of Rochester, if you take a look at 650 to 700 square feet homes were pretty common. Now you go into Oakland Township and you have houses out there as big as factories, 40,000 square feet, right, Chief? And so also the type of construction, lightweight construction. Back in the day when they used to frame out a roof in a house, you'd have common rafters. When you go into your attic now, it's like a lumber yard. And so firefighters are faced now with a whole lot more hazards than what they used to be from the standpoint of collapse and the way things burn. So the techniques will continue to change and firefighters will continue to work from that standpoint. But it's still going to take water going on. But some of the technology, like you mentioned, Pat, in regards to thermal imaging and those sort of things are all good. As an old timer, 42-year old timer, one thing that's changed that maybe hasn't been so good, and that's turnout gear. And a lot of firefighters will say, well, why? Why are you saying turnout gear? Well, turnout gear's gotten almost too good nowadays, and firefighters, unless they're well-trained and paying attention to what's going on, find themselves getting too deep into a fire and getting exposed to flashover. And that's not a good thing. Back in the old days, you know, the equipment wasn't quite so good, so maybe you didn't get in so deep. So firefighters and the training that they have to do now is extensive. And as all of the chiefs will tell you, the biggest fear is making sure that when our guys go out on the fire, all 4 are coming back home. And that's really kind of a tough thing. And that's where the chiefs probably worry the most about making sure that the firefighters are trained and ready to go.
Chief Canto, Chief Canto's coming to Rochester Hills 4 years ago from Louisville, Kentucky area. I mean, do you see some evolution in the future of firefighting changing?
I think one of the things that has to be looked at is firefighter safety, is things the way we necessarily did it before. I know there's people in here that started in the fire service, you didn't wear air packs, we kept our gear dirty. They're finding now with cancer, the number one killer, or heart attacks, their number one killer are firefighters, but you also have cancer that is starting to really become prevalent. They're finding it a lot more. And so, we have to look at some of those things. The way we, again, as Chief Cecil was saying, just construction's changing. The fire department where I started in Pennsylvania was a lot different than what it is here. Is just because it's a metropolitan community, more of a metropolitan area. It's old buildings. The fire department started in 1773 by Ben Franklin, so it was an old city type of construction. But now, as as Chief Cecil was talking earlier, you get up into Oakland Township, you have truss construction, so all the things that kill us can. So we just got to keep continuing to watch that. And firefighter safety is a huge priority for us. Even just the latest technology with air packs, things that have changed over the years. If one of our firefighters go down, we know in 30 seconds to a computer sitting out front who's down. Where before, you had to wait for a pass alarm to go off because the pass alarm had to get turned on by the firefighter. And we all know firefighters didn't turn them on, so then we went to the system where once you turned your bottle on, the pass alarm came on. Now they have systems that they're working on that you can actually, through trajectory, find people inside buildings. But I remember reading a story when they actually went from steamers to motorized fire apparatus, is the firefighters refused to use the motorized fire apparatus. It sat there. And so we're our own worst enemy, is that we just refuse to acknowledge things that have been problems over the past. And it's the same things that kill firefighters. Heart attacks kill firefighters. We know that building construction kills firefighters. We know fire conditions kills firefighters. But we ignore it and still continue doing some of the same things over and over again. So hopefully we just, nobody dies in vain. At least we make a change.
All right. The biggest fire that I can remember in Rochester in recent memory is when the building blew up in downtown Rochester. How many people were on that fire? Dave, as I remember, you said Rochester Hills was never dispatched to that. I think you guys.
Before eventually got dispatched, but we were all down. I was down there. We were down there before it's been dusty. So we could get there.
Yeah, just grabbed fire trucks and started figuring somebody needed help down there. So, does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask amongst firefighters? Well, hand one to this handsome guy over here.
I hear the word battalion mentioned often. Is that part of your hierarchy, or what does that mean? You say like he's a battalion chief. What does that mean?
A battalion chief, if you look in the rank structure, it's really basically military. You have companies. Each company's assigned personnel. They're assigned to shifts. Some fire departments actually call shifts platoons. And so then you have a battalion chief who oversees that shift of those firefighters. And so even when you start getting into bigger organizations, you even find some fire departments that use military rank insignia even on their collars. That's big. It's pretty prevalent in like the Louisville area, but the bigger the department, like how they have more companies, more platoons, more personnel on a shift. And so for example, if you have, if you think about in the military, if you go to a battalion can be made up of so many companies. And then you could have, like, for example, in New York City, they have divisions. Well, that division is made up of so many battalions. And so we have one battalion chief who's responsible for each shift.
In Rochester Hills, we have 3 shifts, so we have 3 battalion chiefs. One of them was here, and it looks like he ran out. Ron?
Actually, I have a couple questions. I'm interested in the rationale between yellow and red in the trucks. And then number 2 would be, what's the typical cause of the fires in our area, and what percentage might be arson?
Fire chiefs, I'm leaning on you guys on this one.
Yellow trucks haven't been out in the sun.
Thanks, Chief. I was just going to say, yellow ones aren't right. Back in the probably 70s, guys, there was a big study that was given for visibility, and there were some people who came out and said, hey, the best thing to do is go to lime green or go to yellow out of red, and so some fire departments converted. The only problem is if you're in an area like we were back then, yellow Take a look at the truck on the screen right now. What if that was yellow? Yeah, a little bit harder to go ahead and look at. So people will look at tradition, but I think you're seeing a lot of the trucks going back to red, more from a traditional thing. But the more interesting thing that I don't have the answer for is why did they start with red? Right? What was the other question?
How do most fires start?
How do most fires start? I could tell you in Rochester, it's typically either carelessness or electrical failure. And we're pretty blessed in this area as far as arson goes. You'll find that when we do have arson, it tends to be a string of arsons, and it's typically caused by a single person who has some mental issues. And once you can identify that person and have them move to a different community, once you can get them help, those problems typically go away. The one thing that this area has always been fairly blessed with is citizens who are fairly economically okay, and so we don't see much arson for profit. Back in the 70s, at least in the city of Rochester, we had a huge string of small structure fires. It was a young man who had some problems that was setting them, but arson in the city of Rochester really hasn't been a problem. I don't know about Chief Cantu and Chief Skralchuk.
We haven't had really that many arson fires. There were some that were considered suspicious, but then they found out a cause. For us, it's cooking fires, but we are actually finding, actually last month, a lot of carelessly discarded smoking material. We have a couple incidents like that. And we were kind of talking about this earlier, is our biggest run is EMS. That's the incidents that we make. 73% of our runs are EMS related. So we're having more of those, but we're starting to find is that we're starting to have more structure fires. We're starting to have more vehicle accidents. So all our call volume is continuing to grow.
Yeah, we have the three chiefs here, so this is a great opportunity. I'm sure some of the firefighter guys would love to ask them some questions, but who else has a question for?
I just want to add.
Go ahead, Paul.
I just want to. There they go again. I just want to add the fact of, you got three chiefs sitting here right now, but when I started 35 plus years ago, you never mutilated each other. I mean, Mark Belkoff, bless his soul. But he drove us into the ground at times on fires, and you just never called mutual aid. Us to come into the city of Rochester was just unheard of. This day and age, with us in the fire service, we depend on mutual aid. Day in and day out, these three departments alone, we're constantly, responding into each other's community. And it's true for the fire service across the nation. We've all got to work together, and it's really the only way that we can do it. So we do, training together, large purchases of equipment, different things like that. So there's a huge effort in regards to teamwork amongst departments now, where years ago that really wasn't the case. And that has changed tremendously, and it's a good thing. We've taken a step in the right direction. So.
When we were looking at some of our earliest records, and the Brooklands Fire Department was trying to be established, they were leaning on the city of Rochester to train them, to show them everything. So the chief was going down to Brooklands all the time. So first of all, thank you to the three chiefs. We really appreciate your support of this program tonight. Once again, we're looking for great information and to keep telling our own story. I'd like to thank Pete Zill, who's really chased down Rochester Hills. We hope it turns into a publication of some sort, and the goal is to have some permanence to this. We do have some refreshments in the back. Samantha Lawrence is our archivist in the back. Her job is to protect, because I said this is a crowd that you have to really watch out for. They're all firefighters. There is some really neat archival material there. You're welcome to look at it. We are always nervous when there's food and archives close together, so if you could be careful around some of our archival material. If it's sensitive stuff, she may have gloves or she may handle it herself too, but we want you to look at anything that we have back there. There's some equipment here too, and I appreciate Chief Crowell for loaning some of the items there, and I think Chief Cieslak, we have some of your items there too. Out in the parking lot, there's some pretty interesting pieces of equipment, from a 1940s era Mack truck to a brand new tower ladder truck that the city of Rochester Hills has just received. So we'd love to have you go out there and check all that out too. These guys will stick around. This program will hopefully go on YouTube in the very near future, and we're going to have a chance to keep telling this another little segment of the history of the Rochester Hills, Oakland Township community. So thanks again. Thanks for coming out tonight.